There are thousands of indie game developers out there who all share one goal: the ability to wake up, create video games, and get paid enough to not stress about life's expenses. This is known as the indie game dev dream. Well, is it possible? For all the countless unspoken stories, failed attempts, and the harsh reality of the odds being incredibly stacked against us, there are a few stories that light the path. The stories that give us hope and guide us in the right direction to one day achieve these like-minded aspirations. This is the story of how this studio raised nearly $1 million in just 30 days. Let's hear it from the team. What is Kindred Fates?
So Kindred Fates is an open world monster taming RPG. It's set in a darker world than most monster taming RPGs that people are used to. It has a really high focus on player choices, making a big impact on the world through things like, permadeath, evolutions having split paths, and each type having its own unique playstyle. So if you're a fan of games like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild, and you're a fan of games like Pokemon or Digimon, that's kind of what this is. Kind of a mashup of the two, but with a lot more focus on creating a meaningful narrative and meaningful player choices.
How did the idea of this game come to life?
It's funny, whenever we talk about this, there's always like a million places it started, it seemed like. And it wasn't until my brother and I started working on a small programming test together and building out something that was fun there that we turned it into what it is now, or the beginnings of what it is now. I guess originally it was a tabletop game, and the very first creature designs were created for a tabletop RPG similar to Dungeons and Dragons. But we kind of dropped that, and it wasn't called Kindred Fates then. It was actually like a fake Pokemon D&D kind of thing. And we just kind of lost interest in that and dropped it. But then later my brother and I started working on trying to just build a game in Unity. I was teaching him programming, and we started working on like a 3D monster battling game, kind of similar to Pokemon Generations, which is a fan game from way back. From there, it sort of organically grew into what it is now.
How has the success of your company changed the game's scope?
Orders of magnitude, just so much.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, it was originally just sort of almost a thing that we were just doing for fun, or it was like for educational purposes. So once we decided that we were gonna take it serious and develop it into a full game, the scope grew a lot, and then it grew to the point where like, okay, we should do like an open world thing with this. And it'll have a story, it'll have obviously the action combat, evolutions. We started looking at what we wanted to do different from the monster taming games that were already out there, and how we could what we could do to push the genre forward and get it out of the sort of stagnant place that it's been in for a while.
Because this was happening like right as the directly after the Sword and Shield trailer first came out.
It was like a little bit before, like a couple months before we first started working on it, I think. And then they released that very first trailer for Sword and Shield, and by that point I think we had enough ready that we were like, okay, people are pretty...
Yeah, that's when we really we really took it seriously, I think.
Yeah, well, we only had like a week or two to release our first trailer at that point. Yeah, so we were like, we should get this out now while everybody's like, well, it's fresh in everybody's mind. We did the Kickstarter, and we had a bunch of stretch goals, so naturally the scope grew more from there. But since the Kickstarter, the scope has stayed the same.
You've looked into our Kickstarter, so you know that we raised a bit more than $50,000, to the point where we had to make new stretch goals. We never expected the scope to increase the way it did, but yeah, it definitely caused some confusion in the first few weeks after the Kickstarter. Like, okay, how are we gonna do co-op?
Everything that we put as a stretch goal was going to be doable, but there were certain stretch goals that required us to really rewrite everything that we had, because they were such big changes to the existing code base, like co-op, for example.
Yeah, it's just not something we expected we'd actually hit.
You make sure that if you do hit it, it's realistic that you could pull it off. But we were just hoping for the 50,000 and to be able to.
What drove you guys to do a Kickstarter in the first place?
to build a game like this is really expensive. Just any open world game is kind of inherently going to be expensive to make, what with all the assets, especially monster taming game with a bunch of characters that all need art, especially when it's 3D. You know, they gotta have models, animations, and concept art, and just everything that goes into that VFX. So it's really expensive to make a game of this scope. So we knew we needed some outside funding. Up until the Kickstarter, we had been funding literally everything out of pocket. I would go to my day job, work there, get paid, take all the money that I got paid from that paycheck, dump it into art, rinse and repeat, live on beans and rice, that kind of thing.
Yeah, everything that wasn't rent and or rice was
it was in art. So we knew that wasn't going to be sustainable, and we weren't even doing that, we weren't able to keep up with the pace that we needed to in order to, you know, get all the assets in at a reasonable pace. So we needed some outside funding from like Kickstarter or a publisher, an investor somewhere, to actually pull off a game of this scope in less than, 10 or 15 years. So the 50,000 initially was like, okay, what can we do to pull off like the absolute bare minimum version of this, and let's go for that. And then from there we can use the Kickstarter as, and this is a very common thing, I think a lot of people that are kind of outside the game development industry or the like game publishing industry don't realize this, but using a Kickstarter or using crowdfunding as a way to show that there's interest for your idea and that there is a tangible market for the product you're trying to create is actually very common. And it's something that publishers look for, or the investors look for, especially if your Kickstarter does really well. So we use that to, gain the interest of people who, first of all wanted to play the game, and then after that, were interested in publishing a game like this.
What do you believe led to the massive success in your funding campaign?
There were a couple different factors. So the first was, we felt pretty strongly like just the inherent idea of our game was something that people would be really drawn to. It's something that we had seen asked for in the community for a pretty long time, like years. Especially since Breath of the Wild had come out, there was this idea in the cultural zeitgeist of what if there was a Pokemon meets Breath of the Wild, or an open world Pokemon game. That would be like the coolest Pokemon game ever. And we waited and waited, and we just didn't see any sign of that happening. And so we were like, okay, cool, let's do it then. If nobody else is going to do it, then we're going to do it. So I think a lot of people were really excited for that and had been waiting for it, and so they latched onto that. Another thing was we managed to get some pretty really helpful YouTubers to help us out with spreading the word. And beyond those guys, there are companies that you can work with for your Kickstarter that will help to promote it as well. One of the most popular ones, and the one that we went through, was BackerKit, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah, so they were really helpful. They saw that there was a lot of traction with the project, wanted to help out quite a lot. So, we went with it, and like those last couple days, they really got the word out to a lot of people for us, and we started doing way better than we thought we would. They can sometimes be choosy with who they work with, or the kind of benefits that they're willing to give out to certain projects. Most companies like that want to see that your project is kind of doing well before they commit to like devoting the time and money to your Kickstarter. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? But it's not always like that. So
yeah, another huge recommendation is, just outside of BackerKit, if you have physical rewards in your Kickstarter, like we had for our Auburn plushies, and somebody offers to handle fulfillment of those physical rewards for you, you should most likely take them up on that, because it can turn into a huge headache, especially shipping internationally.
At the very least, like, have a plan for your physical rewards well in advance of your Kickstarter. If you're going to do them, then you need a plan for someone handling fulfillment that isn't you.
You need to focus your attention on the game, and it's, oh my gosh, it can be a huge mess.
Was there any major mistakes made or strategies you would have approached differently, being able to do it all over again?
The fulfillment on the physical reward.
That was a big one, yeah. Another one was, like, honestly not taking enough time to get the Kickstarter ready beforehand. I feel like that's something that you hear a lot, actually. It's just really surprising once you get into it, how much there is to do. I would say not polishing the Kickstarter page enough before putting it out was something that we could have done better and would have helped us out. Like we didn't end up getting the little projects we love check mark, which can be pretty helpful for a project.
Oh yeah, I mean that'll put you on the front page most of the time.
Yeah.
Of Kickstarter. But
so I would say polish your page to a perfect sheen before you launch it. Yeah, get those GIFs nice and shiny.
Yeah, and not to say that ours was like bad necessarily. I think it just could have been a lot better.
Yeah.
Right.
The more presentable your page is, or the more polished your page is, the better that it will do.
What advice would you guys give to developers looking to start their own company and future crowdfunding indie games?
For starting your own development company, I guess I can think of a couple small things. I feel like there's a couple stages that people go through when doing game development in general. The first stage is kind of like you have this idea for a game, and maybe you have experience in game development, or you've written games before or not, but you have this idea and you really fall in love with it, and you start planning things out. You start writing things down and taking notes and imagining what it's going to be like. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that romantic phase of this idea, and they don't move on to actually opening up Unity or opening up Unreal or GameMaker or whatever you use, and just getting even a proof, the most simple proof of concept, and you got to get to that part, and then X% of people get to there, and that's awesome, but then they kind of get stuck at that stage because they don't have like the team they need or the resources or something. And at least I can only really speak from my experience, right? But for me, what I found really helped to get past that was actually devoting some amount of money to the project that you're working on. I've found, at least in like the circles that I've been in, that a lot of people are really hesitant to actually put some money into what at the time is like, it's a personal project or it's a passion project. It's a hobby, and I think a lot of times that can hold you back, because once you're willing to spend, any amount of money, just some amount of money on something like art or some plugins from the asset store that could like really help you out. Once you're willing to do that, the ceiling for what you're able to do goes way up, and things actually start to get easier. And I've also seen projects where, and I've been on projects where the team kind of refused to do that, or they didn't like that idea at all, and it really, really held them back. So again, I can only really speak to what I've found, or what I've seen, but being willing to take what you love and actually take it seriously and put some amount of money into it, I think can help a lot of people get over that hump and really get their game to the next level.
And something about the romantic period that you were talking about, it's kind of like a relationship, you have that honeymoon phase at the beginning, like you were talking about, where you're really excited about the idea, you're super passionate about it, but just like a relationship, eventually the honeymoon period is gonna either end or wind down. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad idea, or that doesn't, people might get discouraged, like, it's not as exciting as when I first dreamt it up. That's gonna happen when you stare at something every day for months. It's gonna just become less exciting, but that doesn't mean that you should stop or be discouraged or think it's a bad idea.
Is the game dev dream worth it? I'm sure everybody's experience is different with this whole indie game dev dream, but in my experience and the dozens of other indies I have talked to about this, I would say, hell yeah, the grind is worth the payoff. Work hard for what you believe in, adapt to what works for you, and learn from your past mistakes. For the majority of developers, there is a much longer battle of continuously failing than there is a successful game launch. Every time you fail, you will learn something new, which will get you a tiny step closer to more success in the future. If you believe in what you are doing and have the drive to keep learning and remember that you always need to improve and adapt, then, well, maybe the next story we hear about will be yours. I just want to say a huge thank you to the team at Skymill Studios for doing this with me. I'm always trying to reach out to new developers and people that are just doing what I do, but better. I don't have all the answers, so it's cool to connect with other people that have different skill sets. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Please make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in this kind of stuff. I'm sure I'll see you guys soon, but until then, I hope you enjoyed.